This is the big news coming in at this hour. President Donald Trump has taken to social media to say that he has had a chat with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin this evening to end war in Ukraine. Trump said that he spoke to Russian president and the talk lasted for quite some time. Russia and the talks have been around Russia-US prisoner swap. He said that peace talks should start immediately, and apparently that the Russian president has also agreed to start negotiations. Trump said that he will inform Zelensky of the talks and have thanked Vladimir Putin for releasing Mark Fogel. My colleague Vishnu Shom is with me right now for more on the story. Vishnu, what really now does this mean to Ukraine? They have been on the receiving end. They have suffered invasions by Russia. President Zelensky, it seems, is merely being informed of this conversation.
Well, Rika, let me tell you what this is. This is what we have hoped for now for the last several years. This is the beginning of the end of the war between Russia and Ukraine, and one can only hope that the peace process that President Trump speaks about actually goes through. What he has said after a conversation with Russia's President Putin is that, and I quote, "We both agreed we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia-Ukraine. President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto of common sense. We both believe very strongly in it. We agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. We've also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately. That's critical. And we will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation, something which I will be doing right now. I've also asked the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the Director of the CIA, and others to lead the negotiations, which I feel strongly will be successful. Millions of people have died in a war that would not have happened if I were president." Now, I was in Kiev a couple of months back, and I asked President Zelensky this very question. What would happen if President Trump came to power and if the U.S. was no longer willing to endorse the war being fought between Ukraine and Russia? To which he said at that stage that there were no clear signs that Trump would necessarily do that, and that on the basis of conversations with the Republicans, he hadn't received any such signal. Well, this is the signal, and this is the signal very clearly that America wants this war to end. Remember, it is America's support that Ukraine has relied on most heavily. America has been arming Ukraine in this war. The Ukrainians were invaded by Russia. Their territory was taken over, large parts of it. And even though the ultimate goal of the Russian invasion, which was to have a regime change in Kiev, was not achieved, the Ukrainians did suffer immensely, of course, as did the Russians. Millions of Russians have lost their lives. The Ukrainians have gone north into the Kursk region. But ultimately, the battle is in the east of Ukraine, in the Donetsk and the Luhansk region, and in the south of Ukraine, in the Crimea. These are areas where the Russians have been pushing west, and the Ukrainians have been trying to repel them. Over the last couple of months, we've seen the Russians make considerable gains, albeit small gains, in the east of the country. However, that has come at enormous cost to the Russians. Russia had to rely on its allies, including North Korean soldiers, to actually keep the Ukrainians at bay. But ultimately, it's been a slow, degrading war industrially, militarily, and ultimately in human lives for both sides. On the one hand, it's been a very high-tech war, the use of drones, the use of extremely advanced missiles on both sides, but on the other hand, trench warfare as well. That we've seen perhaps at this level for the first time since the Vietnam War. At the end of the day, I should mention that this is one of the most costly wars in terms of the loss of human lives since the Second World War. And if this is an indicator that it's going to now start to end, that is absolutely crucial. One final point over here, the Ukrainians have to accept this. President Zelensky has so far rejected any effort to end the war. So it is critical that the Ukraine accepts this in order for there to be peace.
Absolutely. It is critical that Ukraine accepts this. Thank you very much, Vishnu, for joining us on the broadcast. We're also joined by David K. Johnston, Professor of Public Policy at the Rochester Institute of Technology. We're joined by Fred Weir, senior journalist from Russia. He is an expert on Russian affairs. Fred, good evening to you first. How is the Russian media reacting? It's a big news that we are reporting at this hour. President Donald Trump having spoken to Russian President Vladimir Putin and said that negotiations about stopping the war in Ukraine has to start immediately.
It's a little bit early to gauge the Russian media response. This is like very, very recent news, but it is momentous. The fact that they've had an acknowledged phone conversation and that they have decided to talk directly, Putin, Trump, visit each other's countries. I think this is quite astonishing. I'm in the camp of people who would be skeptical of the possibilities of any quick breakthroughs. I think the Russians are quite adamant that they will not go for a ceasefire. They want a comprehensive end to the war, one that would be legal and, a settlement that will be lasting. Also, they aren't going to compromise on their idea that the Ukrainian regime has to be not only neutral, but demilitarized. The main reason they went to war was not for territory, but to change the nature of the Ukrainian state. And I don't think they're going to give up on that. But the fact that these negotiations are going to happen, and the fact that Trump and Putin decided to do that between themselves, and Trump is now going to phone up Zelensky and tell him so, shows that there is going to be movement. And this is really hopeful.
David K. Johnston, how do you react to what our guest just said, Fred Weir, that Russia may not accept a ceasefire?
Well, I think the Russians have, in fact, been very clear that they're not interested in a ceasefire. And I think from the point of view of the Ukrainians, the question is going to be, why should they give up any of their territory, especially since Russia in 1993, in a treaty, pledged to never invade Ukraine if it would give up its nuclear weapons and turn them over to Russia. I think that, well, it would be good to end this war. That's the number one value, to end this war. The signal it may send to people who want to expand their territory, President Xi, for example, in China, is the U.S. will not stand and protect people who are the victims of aggression and illegal warfare. That's the downside concern.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me on the broadcast this evening. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on his way to the United States for his first visit since Donald Trump's re-election as the 47th president. This high-stakes meeting is set to strengthen India-US ties, with talks focusing on trade, defense, and global security. The issue of tariffs and deportations is also likely to come up. Modi's first visit comes at a pivotal moment as both nations navigate a shifting geopolitical landscape. Will this partnership redefine the future of global alliances? My colleague Nikunj Garg has more.
Well, absolutely. It's a short visit, but it's a visit of consequence. Many people have described this relationship between these two democracies as the most consequential relationship of the emerging times. And to discuss all of that, I am joined by Michael Kugelman. He is a fellow at the Wilson Center, specializes in South Asia. Michael, welcome to NDTV, as always. Let me begin by asking you that many people now think that this relationship is fast moving beyond the pale of bilateralism, and it is now acting as a global stabilizing force and a force that is for global good. Would you agree with that summation?
Well, I think so. I mean, there's been exponential growth in this relationship, really for the last few decades, and that includes during the first Trump administration. And I think that there might be a bit of uncertainty as to the direction of U.S. foreign policy with our new president. But I think when it comes to India and the relationship with New Delhi, I think that it's very easy to predict where it's going to go. It's going to be in a good place. There certainly will be challenges, but I do think it's going to be in a good place. And to your point about it being for the global good, yes. I mean, to take one example, I think you look at both President Trump and Prime Minister Modi as leaders that really want to bring an end to wars, and particularly the war in Ukraine. Trump and Modi have taken the same position on this issue for quite some time, and that might be something that they speak about when Prime Minister Modi is here. But I think that this is a relationship that entails not only bilateral partnership, but also cooperation in third countries and also multilaterally, whether you're talking about the Indo-Pacific Quad or other groupings like that.
And the fact remains that both the leaders also share a very good, many would say very high-end personal chemistry. President Trump has traveled to India, has traveled to Ahmedabad particularly, and during his first stint only, the status of this relationship was elevated to a global strategic partnership. And do you think that the entire gamut of this relationship is now fast moving into a place where no area is beyond cooperation? Earlier, initially, and this is an hindrance we have seen all over the world. The tech transfer was an issue, high-end technology transfer was a challenge. But do you think that this relationship is now transcending all those barriers and can actually move into a place where you may not call it a free trade agreement, but a much more smoother transaction of goods, services, and products can take place?
Yeah, I mean, I think that New Delhi has been very savvy as to how it's approached this issue of tariff risks from the Trump administration. Right away, when Trump took office, New Delhi had signaled its willingness to reduce some tariffs, which it's done. And so I think that means that Prime Minister Modi is not going to find himself in an uncomfortable position where President Trump asked for there to be significant levels of tariff reductions right away. And I do think that what could be seen as a challenge might be an opportunity for these two leaders. I do think there's a good chance that Prime Minister Modi might make a pitch to President Trump that there be a negotiation, not necessarily during this visit, but in the coming days and weeks, a negotiation towards some type of deal, not an FTA, it might be premature to talk about that, but an economic partnership accord perhaps, that would enable both countries to lower their tariffs. There's a lot of trust and goodwill in this relationship right now, so I think that might be a realistic thing to look at. And we've seen India in recent years being more comfortable about pursuing trade deals, and I think the Trump administration would be a willing interlocutor, particularly compared to the Biden administration, which had imposed a number of conditions, environmental, labor, on any type of new trade deal. I don't think you're going to see that with the Trump administration. So there might be an opportunity here to pursue some type of trade deal short of an FTA.
The Supreme Court has pulled up Enforcement Directorate and said that the concept of PMLA cannot be to ensure that a person remains in jail, directing that Indian Telecommunications Service officer Arun Kumar Tripathi be released on bail. A bench said that the concept of PMLA or Prevention of Money Laundering Act cannot be to ensure that a person should remain in jail. They also said that PMLA is being used like the dowry law. Cricket now, Team India is ready for the Champions Trophy. They begin their campaign minus Jasprit Bumrah in 8 days from now. Today they completed a 3-0 series sweep versus England in the ODIs, winning the final encounter by 142 runs. Shubman Gill led the charge with his 7th ODI ton. Virat Kohli was back in form with a half-century, and Shreyas Iyer too made an impression with a 78 of 64 balls.